So here we are. These aspects I wanted to mention. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone attending in the room, but also those that are online this morning. I think Jean-François said that 150 people were following online. I don't know if it's still the case, but that's a lot of people. So thank you so much. And as we said, you can ask questions just like this morning. You can ask questions whether directly in the chat if you follow online, or you can just raise your hand in the audience. So we're going to be doing presentations for an hour and 15 minutes. Then we'll have a break around 3:15. You'll be able to go and get coffee, and then we'll get back quite quickly. We'll get back quickly in the room so that we can start the last session of the day, which will be debate. So today, just maybe a very short introduction to start with. As you know, I am a sociologist, but I represent MDM at the National Commission, at the National Consultative Committee on Human Rights, actually. And in the past few years, we worked on health and environment. So just a very short introduction to say that, I would say that things are happening in the world. I'm thinking of the last COP Conference of Parties that were not such of a big success, but I don't want to destroy any of the hopes that we've managed to get back during lunch. But these COPs, they have a story linked to the environment, of course, but depending on authors from different era. I want to go back to the 70s. So this is an old story. This is the Conference of Stockholm. And following this Conference of Stockholm, there were different reports. There were founding reports, actually, regarding the environment. Namely 1987, in which we talked about sustainability for the very first time, even though this is something that is quite controversial at the moment. But whether it's the IPCC or environmental matters, health matters, social cohesion, everything is linked. And so in 1992, we get to the Conference of Rio, and here there is a new notion, that is, say, the right to have access to a healthy environment. And this isn't something that is part of any international convention at the moment, but this is still something that we mention. A healthy environment is important, and I think this is something that will show in the next presentation. And so now regarding this question of rights, and I don't want to add up to this, but regarding the context that we're in, talking about rights is important. Then second thing is about practices. So what does civil society do? And I'm not only talking about, institutions or national bodies or anyone gathering at the COPs, for example. But if I'm not mistaken, at MDM, I think it's been about 10 years now that we have put the environment on in our top priorities, whether it's the waste matter that we have in the Philippines or the pesticides use in Africa, and we're going to have a presentation about this. So we need to take into consideration environmental concerns. What is impacting us, the fact that we're not able to live in some areas. And I think that in certain areas, it's really important for NGOs to be present and to bring some added value. So that's just a few words that I wanted to say as an introduction. And I think that Fabien Lemozy is the one to start. So usually what we do is that we introduce all of our speakers. So I am going to do just the same. I mean, he's a doctor in sociology, but he's also an occupational health physician. And he worked on platform-related issues, and I think you actually published a book, right, with Stéphane Lelay, if I'm not mistaken. And this book is entitled Platform Workers a question about democracy.
Fabien va nous parler aujourd'hui en fait d'une forme de plateforme qui
So Fabien is going to tell us a bit more about this platform, that was implemented, or that was created at least for delivery people. Thank you, Christian. I am honored to be here with you today. So thank you so much to MDM and to the organizers of this event for inviting me. And thank you to Mr. Pavida for thinking of me. I'm an academic, so I'm used to just thank people and having papers in my hand. I usually have a table, so now I have papers in my hand, and I have to say I'm a bit, I don't really know what to do with my papers anymore. But anyways, thank you so much for being here today. And I think I also have to handle the clicker or the remote thingy, right? So this is a research that I've done with the ANSES, which is the National Agency for the Environment and Security. And so this is an agency that has funded this research project. And this is a research project that we started talking about with MDM, but also with the volunteers at Bordeaux for the squat mission. So this was Mr. Garcia that was in charge of that at the time. Then there was a Claire Dugleux as well. So thanks to her, because this is a mission that's, a project that has transformed. This was about helping workers living in precarious conditions, and in the different interventions that they were conducting in squats, for example, is that they were meeting with workers that were complaining about work, and most of these people were actually working on delivery platforms or for delivery platforms. And so this is the reason why I was contacted, and we started discussing about this. And we figured that it was important to, start talking about the physical and mental health challenges and issues that were related to this work. I mean, why do they complain about working? Especially when they're living in specific conditions, they're a vulnerable population. So it was really interesting to just try and figure out what was behind that. So there's someone from the squat mission that's working with me. We also had people, part of the CGT, so the trade union in Toulouse. We tried to conduct a survey or investigation as well in the psychology of work. So we're doing individual and collective interviews. And this is something that was inaugurated by Christophe Dujour about different pathologies that can be linked back to work. And that work is part of the issues that we might be able to observe when it comes to people's health. So we've got the fact that work is at the center of people's life, and it's heavily linked to politics as well. So what we wanted to do is that we wanted to be able to discuss with these workers and try and understand their suffering, because for us this is basically one of the link of that chain here. And this what they suffer from was something they go through because of work being organized at the society level. So we've done this series of collective interviews. So we've done that with 5 delivery people, and we've done this in partnership with La Maison des Coursiers, which is based in Paris. So it used to be in the 18th district of Paris, and it's currently changing and moving. So the questions that we are raising is that, knowing that work is at the center of our lives, the idea is to try and understand a bit more about occupational health. But the real question that we're raising is that, of course, if we're talking about undocumented delivery people, I mean, is occupational health relevant when we're talking about population living in precarious conditions or circumstances and populations that are quite vulnerable? so that work would only be, we might think that work is a tiny part of, not one of the main reasons of their suffering, but the idea is to try and understand whether this is a relevant question or not.
Mettre un contexte que lors de l'enquête collective avec les livreurs sans papier, leur trajectoire sociale se caractérisait par en fait des conditions.
So for these delivery workers, we know that there are common points that usually had a very tough journey before arriving in France. Most of them live in social centers or in squats, or some of them were actually also living in the streets. So we do have people that are just, sometimes marginalized. I was telling you about someone that was a homeless. They're sometimes unemployed as well, or they have very precarious jobs. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So they have a journey that is very unstable. And we also know that in most of their working career, they're often exploited. So employers basically forcing them to accept dire working conditions or illegal working conditions. For example, for delivery people, they've accepted to work for €5 per hour as a bodyguard, or earning 400 to 500 euros to clean every day, or delivering something through Uber Eats, for example, for €1 per delivery. And, with this concept of saying, oh, if you don't do it, I'll find someone else to do that. So, of course, these workers are completely crushed by people trying to profit off of them. And this is also why these work organizations are quite unique, is that we've got an algorithm managing these delivery people. And so it's we have this idea that it's quite impossible to get rid of that domination here. And so what we wanted to try and have a look at is that this domination is being reinforced because of the existence of these platforms. So this is going to increase domination by work. And so one of the first element is the identity renters for these platforms. So the delivery workers, they have to give an ID card to have access to the platform, to have access to this work. And so they're often renting accounts because this is the easiest way to get an account. So this is an illegal practice, and this is something done by an entrepreneur that is going to create an account on the platform and rent it to someone for them to use under their name. And so the person, the delivery person, becomes a third party, an intermediary person. And so they give a big commission to the person that rents the account to them. And so we were quite struck by how easy it was to have access to this. It's something that you can find on Le Bon Coin. So you have people also offering services. And so here we're not even talking about a mafia. We're talking about people working at the SNCF, about people working at a prefecture, about normal people just opening accounts like this and just renting their accounts to these undocumented workers. And, there are many accounts that just are being blocked by the platform. And so they have many, many different accounts that they can rent. And so here, of course, the undocumented worker is completely dependent on that platform. And of course, because all of the relationships are completely digital, it makes it easier for the person renting their account to someone to just have this domination here. The second element that is quite important as well is that work is something done in a public space. This is a delivery worker for a platform, and that public space is a threat for undocumented people, for racial people as well. And so undocumented workers delivery workers are also faced with police arrests. And, if they're being identified as someone working for that platform, well, it increases the risk for them to be controlled, to be arrested for an ID check, for example. And it says that it's really easy. They were telling us that it's really easy for the police to get new data. So, for example, someone has been controlled 3 times. So this is a delivery guy in Toulouse saying, the undocumented workers, they just erase the app to make sure that they would not be identified as someone working on that. And there was a report made by Mediapart saying that more and more people were being controlled in the public space, especially people of color. And you've got these platforms, as I was saying, that are doing their own ID checks. For example, Uber has started doing this on their platform. This is completely done at random, but sometimes you have to confirm your identity on the platform. So, of course, this can lead to a lot of anxiety. Delivery guys, for example, are saying that what we do in that case, that we completely shut down the app and we go see the person that runs us the account for them to just take a photo of their face. And so this is when we understand that they go to the prefecture, they go to the SNCF to have the person's photo. Now, when it comes to reinforcing that domination aspect, this is all about the algorithm, as I said. And so here, of course, the performance is being scored, is being rated every single time. So you've got your digital ID, and everything's linked to your data, to the number. So everything's linked to your performance. So a part of the delivery workers is to take care of the statistics, to make sure that they have great reviews, for them to have a great performance in order for their account to remain open. So, of course, this leads to a lot of uncertainty because algorithms are basically the one choosing who to send the delivery to. So it's all about survival here. We're not talking about remuneration or anything. We're talking about livelihood, if you will. It's all about surviving with what you can do through that platform. And so the uncertainty leads to 2 different things: going faster when delivering or being connected as much as possible on delivery platform. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that people spend 10 to 12 hours a day on that platform, 7 days a week, without any rest in between. And so these has consequences on these workers. So they're independent workers, but they're not, because they're completely depending on these platforms. And this is temporary supervision. But we might say that this is something that became constant as they're connected 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And another way to fight against this uncertainty, this is this concept of territories. We see that, for example, in front of a McDonald's, in front of a restaurant, for example, you've got a territory that is being protected. So some delivery workers are creating a little group, and this little group is trying to defend their own territory to try and have as many orders from that restaurant. And so you might have some fights related to this territory distribution or division. And then, of course, here you've got the managerial authority that is being delegated or given, if you will, to the client. So this is the 4th point. So it's all about satisfaction rate. It's all about statistics. And the platform is paying attention to these statistics, to these reviews. This is the most important indicator. If the customer, is complaining about a delivery worker, their account might be blocked, might be cancelled. So, for example, if you have a satisfaction rate that is not as good and it goes, under 95%, for example, well, if you're under 95% in terms of satisfaction rate, you might be expelled from the platform and your account might be completely erased. So, of course, here it's all about the relationship with customers, and the delivery workers with whom we've discussed, they were saying that sometimes they felt humiliated by this relationship, and they explained that this has always been the case because this is an activity that is not considered to be enough or a good activity, or it doesn't have a good image. So when it comes, to delivery work, a lot of studies were conducted by some British researchers. I've got 2 minutes, or I'll try and go faster. But yeah, this is what I wanted to present to you. So it's linked to delivery work. And so this is basically a working organization or organizations that is completely, that is very unstable for workers. And so for the rest of my presentation, because I've got to make it shorter, but here the idea is to show you also the consequences it has on these people. And so what we see is that more and more people suffer from disorders or illnesses because they are in a sector in which they work a lot and their work is very tiring. So, for example, they've got backaches, or they've got urine in their blood, they have pain, different pain all over their body. They're also very tired. And we see that a lot of them have accidents, bike accidents. And so Mr. Chevalier, the coordinator of the Maison des Livreurs, said that in between 2019 to 2023, 17 of the delivery workers working on that platform died while delivering. And so I'm going to stop there because I know that there are many different things, that can be done and talk about the consequences on that on people. But I think we'll have the time to get back to it.
Juste une petite question quand même. Tu décris...
One quick question. You're describing a situation where we don't know if you're talking about experience and domination, and we don't really know whether this is something that is experienced individually or collectively. And in your presentation, you also talked about a certain number of collective initiatives that are unlike what was seen in unions since unions have existed. So how do we make this experience a collective experience? So how can we use it? What do we do with it to bring these people together so that they can get better in their health, in terms of their health? Well, that's what we've seen in Bordeaux with the delivery center that was supported by Médecins du Monde, where basically you have undocumented delivery people that came together to create an organization where they would be able to welcome the people who are working on these platforms, so they have a place where they can rest. And it would be it's a place where they can be together, and there's no competition between delivery people, where you can share an experience, where you can rest, when you can disconnect, when you can relax. And this stemmed from the health concerns that we had for these undocumented delivery people, because people were seeing their colleagues being hit by cars, etc. And they said, well, this is impossible. We can't keep doing this. We need to give more visibility to it. Okay, so how can an NGO like Médecins du Monde and others work and help towards that? Because how can the civil society, different initiatives, foster this kind of space? collective space for resistance, really. Well, this resistance is mainly because about health, and this is what they're trying to tackle here, and this is what has allowed people to make sure that people have the conditions where an attention and a concern and attention can be given to that. This is thanks to the visibility that was given to this fight, it's allowed them to create this Maison des Livreurs. I think we're right on time. So I'll give the floor to Blandine. Blandine, you're an engineer. You're a researcher at the Institute for Climate and Energy. You work on climate change, on agriculture as well. And you worked on Kinshasa specifically. Can you hear me? I know I'm speaking very low. My voice is very low. And I'm not speaking in the mic, so I assume you can't really hear me. But well, you know what? I'm struggling to find my words, so go ahead. Last year, I coordinated a comparative study for in Kinshasa. It was not for the Climate Economy Institute. It was as an independent that I was working on this. And we worked with Jean-C, Chloé, Ovid, who are probably watching us, with Patrick and Florence. Patrick is the environmental program coordinator. We have Julie, Juan Diego, and Claire. And so I'm going to give you the layout. Here is the context of my study. So it was on gardening practices, so vegetable crops. It's in a peri-urban area in Kinshasa. Kinshasa is the capital city of the DRC. The DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. In this peri-urban area, market gardening was put into place by Belgian colons. Large cooperatives were created, and then progressively it became more and more widespread, which means that the vegetables became a source of food for everyone, but it was not sufficient to meet the needs of the population. And progressively, over time, as you had an urban intensification, because there's a large demographic growth, 5% approximately over the past few years. And the areas where people could garden were pushed back outside of the city. And yet, gardening and market gardening is a way to fight against poverty and precariousness. And this is confronted to two issues: land tenure, with a reduction of arable lands, but also land grabbing. You also have practices that are put into place with the systematic use of pesticides that is quite studied in literature. And this is an issue in terms of public health. We estimate that about 100,000 households practice market gardening in Kinshasa, and this also leads to job creations because they also hire seasonal workers. Médecins du Monde, jointly with Caritas and the PROSMACE in Congo, have put into place a program, PROSMAS, in order to support urban market gardening practices to promote consumers, market gardeners, and environmental protection. That is the PROSMAS acronym. The goal is to reduce use of pesticides to improve health for market gardeners. There are three things. First, they want to reduce the use of pesticides by training market gardeners to environmental and agroecological practices, to also give access to healthcare systems with the rehabilitation of 3 health centers. And there's also a bit of advocacy, so to raise awareness and inform on the risks in order to change the legislation. We'll see later on why this is so important. A few months after the launch of this project, Médecins du Monde decided to put into place a operational research program in order to compare on-site the agroecological, so without pesticides approach, and compare it to traditional agricultural practices based on pesticides, in order to use it as a benchmark and have a database that they could rely their work on, but also to understand the market gardening preferences, especially to use evidence and then rely on it for their advocacy work. This is a map of the 3 field where we've done our field study with Caritas, and we did awareness raising near the river in the south, where you have arable lands, and on the north you have an area that is prone to floods. But these are not very arable lands. They're quite poor soil, and that's why they need inputs, because this is sandy soil, so they need pesticides, etc. You can't really see the scale, but this is a very large city, so you can have a large distance between the crop and the place where the market gardeners have to get their input. So you have different issues. In the north, you have floods, and in Ingerie Brasserie is where you have the ecological center of Caritas, where they experiment with farmer fields, and they bring in students. And in Ingerie, you have a lot of land grabbing. So people just grab the land by very strong people that come and simply occupy the area. About 500 market gardeners benefited from an awareness-raising program on agroecology. So these are the questions that we really focused on. I'm not going to get into the detail here, but I'm sorry, I took too much time for the context, but I think it was important. So we wanted to understand the practices in place. We didn't really know how pesticides were used, and whether they were working on the soil, crop rotation. And then the heart of the study was to understand and have levers in order to see how we could influence the choice of these farmers to opt for pesticides or not. And we can see that there are obvious choices, obvious elements that determine the choice, so profitability, the yields. Now, it was difficult for us to assess the yield, but the profitability was something that we really clearly worked on. And we also wanted to understand whether there were determining biases that were not necessarily conscious based on the socio-ecological biases of the farmers. And thirdly, we worked on the health and environmental links in terms of the perception and also the symptoms that the farmers were feeling, and whether this was something that weighed into their decision-making process. Because we had different questions that were quite diverse, we used different data. How long have I been speaking? 18 minutes? Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's been 10 minutes. Oof. Okay, my bad. I freaked out here. So the protocol that we've used was based on different sources of data to look at the determining factors. We organized focus groups to have the qualitative side of things, as well as quantitative survey with 117 market gardeners across these 3 sites. We've also conducted 12 trials every time we tried to use one crop in agroecology. And PPI means integrated. So that PPI is agroecology, and PP means with pesticides. So we had tomatoes. There was a cabbage, and we okra, sorrel, amaranth, and we wanted to see what was the yield and the quality of the vegetable, but because we wanted a technical benchmark. And in the result of the study, so to start off, initially, we hoped to be able to compare in a linear way with farmers that were using pesticides and others that weren't. We thought it was going to be easy, but we found out that there were a lot of different practices actually. So when we analyzed the composition of our group, we were able to actually come up with 3. I'm talking about the result from the quantitative study. So we split the farmers into 3 groups: the ones that were not using synthetic pesticides at all, which was a majority of them, the ones that use them sometimes, and the ones that systematically used synthetic pesticides. And what we did is that the ones that sometimes used synthetic pesticides in the green, the graph on the left-hand side is a combination of 2 questions, really. Because it was really difficult to access this information on agroecological practices. So we've asked different questions as to whether and how often they would use pesticides, whether they used it sometimes or no. The green was for people who were trained to agroecology, and the ones that were trained to agroecology tend to have a more reasoned use of pesticides. The one that systematically used it are the people that were not trained at all, and the ones that know about agroecology but that don't practice anymore. And they give different reasons, but most of the time it's because they don't have access to biopesticides or inputs, or we believe they're not efficient. Most of these gardeners had never actually had access to agroecology training or awareness-raising actions. As for the determining factors, the methodology we've used is quite simple because we've done independence trials between the different groups. So we've created different groups. And the statistical results on the parameters that have an influence on whether they use pesticides or not, well, the older gardeners used less pesticides. The level of agricultural training, not degree or education, it was more about agricultural training. You can have sometimes civil servants that do market gardening for an additional revenue, so you have different levels of education. And sometimes also the more the gardeners were trained to the use of chemical pesticides, the less they used it. So the more they'd had a formal training on pesticides, the less they used them. However, the surface and whether the surface of the crop, belonging to a cooperative, whether they belong to a cooperative or not, didn't really have any, or gender didn't have any influence on that. So what we really looked at, it was what were the gardeners' perception to understand why they were using pesticides. And most of the time, it won't come as a surprise, but it was profitability that came as a main argument. Most of the market gardeners in the focus groups told us, well, the vegetables are not as shiny when we don't use pesticides, and they don't grow as fast. We don't really trust this product, and you sell them for cheaper. But a lot of them also knew, all of them actually, knew that it took a toll on their health. And a lot of them, because it was mainly for sale, but the market gardeners that were consuming their vegetables most of the time were the ones that were using agroecological practices. And this is the hardest part of the study, which was crucial though, was profitability, because you know that this is at the heart of everything, and that's what can influence a change in behavior. Now, we don't have a state-by-state data or a kilo by square meter data. It's too difficult to assess. So we looked at the revenue based on the two harvesting seasons, and there were two in Kinshasa. And the average revenue is higher in the group that has a reasoned use of pesticides. And 275,000 Congolese francs accounts for $95 approximately. 367 accounts for $130. So that's for one harvesting season, not for the whole year. And I think that the average revenue in the DRC is about $500 and $600 per year, I believe. Just so you have something to compare with. And it shows that in the trials in the field, you had competitive yield, sometimes actually better for agroecological practices with lower costs. However, we've also noted that there was a huge variability in prices for the different vegetables, and they're often sold throughout the season, and when you have a lot of supply, the prices drop. And that is the main factor for profitability. I'm not going to ask you to read the whole table, but at least it gives you an idea of the different prices that you can get for one same vegetable. You have a lot of external constraints that weigh on profitability. And in the focus groups that we've organized, we heard a lot about the sale and the fact that clients are not aware of it. They want shiny vegetables without holes in the leaves, etc. And that's difficult to obtain without pesticides. And that means that a lot of market gardeners have dedicated pathways and to sell on dedicated markets. Last results on the use of pesticides. So how these pesticides are used, we can clearly see that there are very harmful practices for the environment, for the health of the consumers and of the market gardeners. 32 farmers used tiodan, which is a brand of pesticide, with endosulfan, which is banned actually in Europe. It's been banned since 2005, and even in the US since 2016. Just to mention one, because there are others that are banned, but these gardeners get their supply from middlemen that come at the border of their field to sell it. And because the trip takes time and it's difficult to carry bottles of pesticides, heavy loads, etc. So it's quite convenient actually. So that's an external constraint in your decision-making process. And it's the belief of the farmer that is going to influence it. 30% don't use pesticides before 7 days prior to the yield. 7 days is not much, especially because the recommendations are much higher set. And most of them don't use protection equipment. But at the same time, we see that it's very dangerous. The use of pesticides is very dangerous. And yet we know that most of the gardeners are aware of the fact that this is bad for their health and for the environment. And when you talk to healthcare practitioners, we see that there are a lot of diseases that are developed by these gardeners more and more. To conclude, we've compared the different agroecological and non-agroecological, and therefore pesticide-based crops in order to use it as data for advocacy. We can see that profitability is an important element, and the variability of prices also, so that these are external factors, and the fact that consumers don't always like organic, what we would call organic products. Access to input has also an impact on the use of pesticides or not. What's interesting is to see that agroecology, again, this is a PPI in French on the slide, but it can, it requires technique and requires experience, but it can be just as efficient as traditional farming practices. So it can be useful to use chemical pesticides, but you need to be trained to do so, even though it sounds a little bit paradoxical. And more broadly, there's the question of the training to the use of pesticides, especially for younger gardeners that tend to use them more. You need to develop value chains. You need to develop awareness-raising actions. I'm sorry, I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going over this very, very quickly. We need to target young gardeners, develop point of sales for agroecological products, and the fact that you can still acquire banned pesticides means that we still need to lobby the government to make sure that they enforce these bans for toxic pesticides. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. This is not easy, because I assume we don't have a lot of agronomists in the room, but it was easy to hear you and to understand you. It's important to make a certain number of issues visible, socio and economic issues, through the prism of health. You're an agronomist, and it makes sense, but most of your presentation raises the question of agroecology. You talk about profitability, which are not health-related issues. So how do you tie this into health? And you started by saying, well, we need to ban these pesticides, when in the DRC, where it's difficult sometimes to interact with the government, but maybe the municipality of Kinshasa could be lobbied, and you talked about the Ministry of Health and not the Ministry of Agriculture. So I was wondering if and why you're asking cross-disciplinary and complex questions. Why do you think that the Ministry of Health could be the best place to hear the conclusions of your research work? This is a very good question. I think that this was done in order to be used for advocacy work. And the detrimental use of these agricultural practices on the health of consumers and of the gardeners is something that is probably what can be used to convince people, and that could be the most efficient in order to act for the public awareness raising. I think that this is what we could use for the gardeners themselves. The ones that we've met and that we've interviewed is that even though they were aware of the dangers, you need to add training to it. You need to give individual action levers. And if you look at the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, I have to admit that I don't really know what is the regulation. I don't know how what the regulation on pesticide is in Kinshasa, but the truth is, I think there's a real mismatch between the law and what's happening in the fields. Anyway, the Ministry of Health is probably capable of supporting programs that will put at the forefront the health of the consumers and of the market gardeners. And I believe that the main issues, the main challenge is to educate the public sector. But as you said, the current political context is really complicated and difficult to compare to the French context. The Q&A session will be at the end. So should I continue with my questions? What should I do? What do you want me to do? Okay.
La suivante. C'est Big Brother, hein, on est contrôlé ici. Hein. Oh là.
Okay, next question. Axelle? Axelle is going to talk. We're going to be back in France. And we are going to talk about the people living in squats in Marseille and where we can find them, how we can give them visibility. And this is a research paper that's really interesting because the methodology and how you approach people living in squats who don't really want to be visible in the public sphere is a real question, is a real issue. But at the same time, you need to understand amongst the squatters, we need to understand what are the blind spots. Because we need to understand the extent of this phenomenon. So over to you. Thank you very much for this great introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I am indeed going to talk about this project called Ici Itinéraire et Situation de vie à Marseille. You can see the dates. May 2023, June 2025. So clearly we don't have the results yet. You'll get them once they're published. So I'll talk about the genesis of this project, how it came about, and the methodology. Now a little bit of context. We're in Marseille here. In Marseille, as we've said, it is the largest city with the most inequalities. The third arrondissement of Marseille, in the heart of Marseille, is known for being the poorest arrondissement in France. In 2022, we were talking about 16,000 people had found themselves at least once living on the street, which is huge. And Marseille is faced with a real estate crisis and housing crisis. One of the solutions that people who didn't have access to dignified housing is squats. And access to services during COVID was difficult for people who were living in squats, and it's been made even worse. Different organizations, people working in the field have tried to raise awareness amongst the public politics. Well, let me tell you that it was impossible to discuss it with the politicians at the time. And we did try, though, but we didn't really know how many people we were talking about. In 2021, the city of Marseille launched the Night of for Solidarity, so meaning that they were going to count people on the street one night.
So you can imagine all of the different players in Marseille, they all thought we're not going to go and count any people are living in squats, right? So this was a missed opportunity again, and we could have given some visibility to these people. And so this is the reason why with a collective of the PACA region, we decided with a lot of different citizens, a collective, squats inhabitants, and activists to start documenting this situation, to start documenting about people living in squats, and this is something that we've published back in 2022. I really encourage you to go through it, to have a read. It was really talking about the difficulties of people's situation, trying and debunk some myth that we have around people actually living in squats. And we also wanted to give some figures, a rough estimate of how many people were living in squats in Marseille. So we've done something community-based. So we thought at some point that we would get the double of people.
Approfondir ce diagnostic.
3,000 people, and we thought at some point it would be multiplied by 2. And we also wanted to create a space with the different players in which we could be talking about. People could be talking about their lives. We would have some researcher to have people working in institutions. And so we did not give up. We decided to fight for that. And this is why the government and the city of Marseille came back to us and they said, all right, you know what, let's do that. We're supporting you. Let's start building something. And so this is how we got to what we call the three-party governance. And there are a lot of people, as you can see on that slide.
Donc, on a effectivement une gouvernance assez plurielle.
So multi-stakeholder governance, as you can see. So this is also the strength of that project. We started to create a local body, a local instance that could work in favor of public policies. We've got the SESTIM and the TELEM. It's all linked to the IRD, but also to the city of Marseille. You've got all of the. You also have field association. You also have people's association, so Concerned People's Association, and we also have the Accreditation Foundation, the former FAP. So this is specific experts. So you can see here the steering committee is quite strategic, and this is something that was built up from the beginning with institutional stakeholders as well. So now, when it comes to the objectives of that project, you can see this is covering different sectors. We need to try and assess the population, trying to estimate how many people live in squats in the city of Marseille. Then we had to look into their journey, their social situation. So we had to look into all of the dynamics. That is to say, we wanted to document the positive experiences and the negative one, of course. But we also wanted to be able to feed the public policies. And we wanted to co-build as well operational response modalities. I'm so sorry for interpreters because this is a European typology. We call it ethos. So the inclusion criteria are very easy. You have to live in Marseille, and it's really hard to define actually because there's no specific definition for that. And you have to be over 18. So now when it comes to the scientific protocol, this is a mixed methodology. I'm going to go back on a few things that I've already said, but the idea was to interview roughly 400 people. And so I'm going to tell you about how we actually been able to identify this hidden population. So we've done these interviews, these questionnaires, and we've also done a qualitative we've also worked on the qualitative aspect of that research. So we've done also interviews with people that work with people living in squats. We've done 15 interviews with players, 30 interviews regarding living conditions with people that live in the squats, and then 10 interviews in cities. So the idea was to be able to do a mind map and to do some biographies as well. So we wanted to work around and with the people living in squats. So here is the focus on the methodology that we're testing. So what do we do exactly? And I think this is the biggest question that people working in the humanitarian sector have. How do you estimate a population that is hidden? It's not easy, of course, and we knew that a lot of squats in Marseille were not accessible just because it wasn't safe for us to access. When we're talking about squats in Marseille, you need to keep in mind that we're mostly talking about apartments in high-rise buildings, a northern part of Marseille that actually belong to social housing agencies. And of course, this is not safe for many different reasons. So how do we get in touch with that hidden population? So what we're going to do, this is on the right of my slide here. So on the right side of the slide, you can see that methodology here. This is a cascading methodology, right? So you look for resource people in the community, and then little, they're going to recruit peers, right? So people that meet with the meet our studies criteria. So we go deeper and deeper every single time. And of course, the research people that we have in the first place, they are the ones that are the closest to people working in the field. And at some point, you know, people are just self-recruiting and they get further and further from us. But this is how we have deep roots in the community of squatters. So it's not about this outreach program. We knew that we couldn't do this outreach and just go and knock on doors of every single squats in Marseille. We wanted for people to come to us and to come to us in a specific place where they had a questionnaire that they could just fill in. And on the other side, so you have these people coming to us, they fill in a questionnaire. And on the other side, we worked with the players, as I said, players that we've had to identify for a while. So this is all about, you know, building these partnerships, building these relationships as well. And what we do is that we give them a small object, and this was a torch key ring. I don't have the word in French. Yes, the torch key ring. And there was the logo of the project on that. So this is a unique object that you can't find anywhere else. And the idea was for them to distribute that from the 1st of June up until the 15th of June to give this unique object to all of the people that were meeting the criteria of inclusion. And so they've done that. And with this magical formula that you can see at the bottom right, there's handled by a very brilliant scientific. The idea was to also ask people, you know, have you seen that object? And then we're doing a ratio in between the number of unique objects that were distributed and the number of people that saw the unique object, and so that answered yes to the initial question. And so this is how we're able to estimate the bottom of the iceberg that you can see here. So the PACA collective had estimated the tip of the iceberg, and we were meant to estimate the bottom of the iceberg. So when it comes to the population of people living in the squats, sorry. So this RDS capture and recapture methodology, of course, this is what adds value. This is what creates connections in between the different communities. Honestly, I really encourage you to have a look at the results because it really shows that you've got communities that are extremely marginalized, or that you've got some communities that are actually closer to one another than we might think. But I'm not going to go further into details when it comes to these results here. What I wanted to do for the end of my presentation is that I wanted to focus on some of the discussions that we've had. And I think it also resonates with what was said since this morning. So we, as I said, have this steering committee, and it was extremely interesting because here we do have an objective when it comes to advocacy. We know the context is degrading, and I'm so sorry that I'm reminding you of this, but we know the context, the situation is extremely complicated at the moment, and we're actually funded by the Research National Agency, and this is something that, you know, we try and own it as well. So what's quite interesting is the way we actually build up the deliverables. We really want to be able to act on the social and political framework. So we want to work on access to food. Action Against Hunger is actually working on that. And so the question would be is that how do we make sure that that this has an impact? And I said that before, we are deeply rooted in that territory. And so what seems to be necessary here or essential would be the civil society. Then the community-based methodology, participatory methodology, it's really easy to say, much harder to do. So we do have different stakeholders here. We've got inhabitants of squats, we've got players, we've got institutions and associations and so on. And so here, the idea was for them to be involved in every single phase of the project, including the analysis and the result and the restitution of that study. Then we worked on the process. We know the process can be very long. We're doing research, trying to get fundings. It's not always easy to get everything that we need, but this is as important as the final objective because we really want to create a space in which we can have all of the different players sitting at the same table, even including institutions. And nowadays it's really hard to actually withdraw from that discussion table. And thanks to scientific data, we're also able to neutralize political challenges. And the idea here is to share knowledge, and it's to build trusting relationship in between the different players. Now, diversified funding plan. Loads of questions on that. We've got the National Research Agency, the government, the city, the foundation, NGOs, labels, and so on. It's really hard to use institutional funding in research. I mean, we're always faced with a lot of different struggles. We really need to be, robust, and we need to go for it if we want to get enough funds. So what we do is that we always say it's important to work with local players and co-build and everything, but it's never that easy. And I just need 2 more minutes. I'm good. So when it comes to advocacy, well, here we're talking, of course, about making sure that results are accessible, but also highlighting these results. So a third of our project, the time that we spend on this project, is actually dedicated to that. We've got a lot of deliverables, and we inspired ourselves off of what MDM is already doing for scientific essays. But we also work on reports that are destined to civil society. We're doing exhibitions. We're also doing deliverables for people living in squats. It's really important for them to know exactly what are their rights and how they can have access to these rights. We also are working on making sure that political agendas are aligned. So this is not always easy because, of course, we're writing these reports. There are many of us participating in the drafting of that report. And the idea, of course, is to get the results published in June 2025, right before the electoral reserve. We know we've got the municipal elections. We've got a very busy political agenda in the next few years. And finally, in the exit strategy, we never think about this, but how can we make sure that this report doesn't end up in a cupboard somewhere or in a drawer somewhere and be completely forgotten about? So the idea here is to make sure that this is something we keep on working on. We really wanted to have an operational impact. We want to also transfer the results to the Observatory of Poverty in Marseille. It was, of course, built thanks to the support of the PACA collective. This is not something happening completely randomly, and the idea is for this observatory to take these results so that they can keep on working regarding the recommendations, political recommendations, and so on, and make sure that recommendations are actually being applied and implemented in the field. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have some time to discuss and debate all together. I just wanted to say that I remember that when we've had the first harm reduction programs, I mean, Marseille, I think, is a social lab, to be honest. So I had questions. I think you've said everything. So let's say that we open the floor to the public. So maybe people in the audience that would like to take the floor, make a comment or ask questions, go ahead. Yes, hi. I just wanted to add a few words regarding what Blandine has said. My name is Gillian, and I'm the DRC manager when it comes to health and environment. So health and agriculture when we're talking about Kinshasa. So we wondered, the first time we thought that maybe we could start working outside of what we're used to and maybe start discussing with other people. So when it comes to health authorities, for example, we work with the Ministry of Health and Occupational Health Center. And the idea was to recognize some occupational illnesses for market gardeners. So this was the first thing that we wanted to fight for. And then the second thing is that we wanted to try and get some recognition of many different, occupational illnesses that are not being recognized, whether they're linked to the use of pesticides or not. We wanted something a bit more general, a bit more global. And indeed, we started working with many different players, maybe new type of players. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture, because those market gardeners are depending on the Ministry of Agriculture when it comes to their work life. And when it comes to our advocacy, we also tried to focus on the Ministry of Agriculture when it comes to, for example, banning those pesticides and making sure that these bans are being enforced properly. And that's it for me. Thank you. Thank you so much for these precisions. We are running out of time. So I'm going to have a look at whether we have questions online, unless we have someone else in the room. But there are There is one question, sorry, for the three of you, saying, would it be possible for you to share your reports, the results that you've told us about today? Is it possible? Can we find them somewhere? What would you say? For the undocumented delivery workers, yes, there is a report. Delivery platform, mental health and physical health challenges. It is made available on the ANSES website and the HL platform. Yeah, we're actually going to publish an article. It's not published yet, but we will communicate on that article once it is time. The Alert-PACA report on these questions, it will be published, in June 2025. June 2025, yeah. So one more question, and this will be the last one, I think, for Fabien. The identity renters on platforms. What is the risk for the prefecture? I'm not sure I understood the question, to be honest. But identity renters, they don't risk anything. They don't risk anything because they are the one opening an account, and they are opening an account with, because they are entrepreneurs, so they do have a legal status. They have a company status. They have all of the documents needed, and then they rent their account to an undocumented worker. So, when it comes to the prefecture, I don't think there's any impact. I don't think there's any problem here. Well, listen, to conclude, I would just like to make one comment, something that was said to me, maybe by Axelle, actually. In a 3 intervention, we're talking about the territory, the area, the local context. In all of your presentation, the local context is extremely interesting. And Axelle, you talked about resistance territories. When we are talking about what's happening in the world, I don't think we're trying to compare global to local here, but there are some resisting areas. And sometimes we have, indeed, different players. We've got researchers with civil society, and I think it's really important, especially if we want to keep hope. And thank you so much for your attention. Have a great coffee break. See you later.